Wes McDonald here, and thank you for tuning into another episode of TigerTube. And if you can't see us, if you're listening, thank you for listening in on Tigerpaw Radio. So super excited for my guests today, both Carrie and Ian Richardson. Thank you very much for being with us today. And we're going to be talking about remote work, but not in the way that you would think, not in the typical ways. We're going to be talking about extreme remote work. So thanks, guys, for joining us today. And maybe I can just get you to introduce yourselves for our audience because nobody knows you better than yourself.
Well, I'm Carrie Simpson, now Carrie Richardson. I'm the founder of Managed Sales Pros, which is a lead generation firm that supports IT companies. I'm also one half of the consulting group Richardson and Richardson, and we focus on strategic planning and business coaching.
I'm Ian Richardson. I am the founder and former CEO of Doberman Technologies, a Michigan-based healthcare managed services company, and the other half of Richardson and Richardson, and the current CEO of Managed Sales Pros.
Well, that's great. Congratulations, guys, on the new endeavor. It's been fun to watch that sort of take shape. And obviously, as your business has changed as well, something else has changed about that. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what inspired you to start moving your life and business on the road. So give us some background for our viewers and listeners. They may not be aware, but you guys did invest in a van, and you don't just use that to go on little road trips, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we bought Penny the van, Penelope the van. We started chatting with the builder in December, and we bought it in January of this year after, I don't know, 6 to 12 months of varying degrees of intensity down the rabbit hole research.
What he's not telling you is I put down multiple deposits with custom build groups, and I have zero patience. I am 100% instant gratification. So, waiting. It's been 6 months. They haven't even started. Cancel, give me my deposit back. I'm done with this. But I actually gave up a couple of deposits as well. And then I realized I knew nothing about vans, how they worked, power, anything. So, and I also am really not that interested in the details. So I was like, oh, this one looks good. Let's buy this one. And then Ian had to take over as the, more focused, responsible party to say like, well, no, we need a power inverter. No, we need hot water and it has to be set up like this. No, we need this. So he was the one who ended up looking at the specs and being super focused on like, we need these things. We can't buy one without it. We're not going to try and install it after. So I kind of got there along the process. But I think that I went down the rabbit hole at the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah. And I had to like push, pull, drag him a little bit to join me in it, but now he is absolutely he doesn't even want a house anymore.
Oh yeah, no, I'd be happier if we just lived in the van. And so
the van has less space than this office.
Yeah, this office is bigger. This office is about 2 times a van, to give everyone kind of an idea. Like it's very, very, very small. You're talking about 21 feet wide, and you maybe have 6 feet total or 5 feet total across on the interior of the van, so it's not a lot of room.
Wow.
And so we bought that van with kind of a couple of things in mind. Carrie, as yourself, Wes, Carrie is from up north. We're in Michigan, the United States, and Carrie is my Manitoban import.
Oh, that's great, eh?
And as part of that import process, we're locked down for an indeterminate amount of time. And it kind of depends on which day you talk to Customs and Border Patrol, but it's like sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 2 years. And so with that plan, we said, okay, well, if we can't leave the States for a period of time, that's all right. We'll just buy a van and we'll bomb around the country. There's a lot of parts of the country that neither of us have seen. And so we started meticulously planning out like, hey, how can we be out on the road for 4, 6, 8 weeks at a time and afford it, one, without throwing us into a tailspin and having to work 2, 3, 5 extra years, but then also, how can we do it in a way that we'll see parts of the country and areas of the country that we never would have seen before?
Yeah.
And van life was the answer there. And we had some experience, Carrie more than I, from working remote resorts in Mexico, Jamaica, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, we had experience working from remote areas and all inclusives, and knew kind of some of the challenges from technology that we would experience, and decided that van life was the way for us. Like it's simple and it's easy and complicated and messy all at once.
Yeah, you definitely don't know what you're getting into at the beginning. Like there are things I love about van life. I like the simplicity of being able to just decide like, hey, I'd like to stay here today, or no, let's move on, or hey, let's go see Madison, Indiana.
Yes.
Hey, it's really cool here, let's stay a few days. And it doesn't disrupt our lives in any way to tack a couple of extra days on, and it doesn't cost anymore. It's not like we have to switch our flights because we really like where we are, and spend another $600 a night on a hotel that doesn't have housekeeping, isn't serving food, and may or may not have an ability to check in easily. It's been a little frustrating. I was like 200 days on the road before 2020, and now I'm probably half that, and half of that in the van.
Yep.
Wow. So it's kind of fun that it actually sounds like, although you're on the road, you're traveling less, which is, I guess, good. I definitely travel less. And a lot of it is thanks to, kind of the technology that affords us to do that, right? So, what we're doing right now in this interview is pretty common for most people now, where they'll be doing video chats all the time. And I can remember pre-pandemic where kind of these video conversations was a very small part of what we did, right? That we were still doing conference calls, and even if we were in a Zoom, oftentimes people didn't have their camera on. And that leads to another topic, which I'm fascinated with right now, which is meeting equity, right? And it's this idea that we have to make sure that everyone has the same access to the technology and, the setup and everything to have a similar experience doing what we're doing right now, right? And that kind of leads me into my next question, right? Is, the technology has come a long way, but what kind of kit specifically did you have to look into? Because you were both still very active in sales, marketing, and consulting. So what's the kit look like?
Yeah, so you start off with laptop, and you kind of balance the power and need for performance with battery life. So when you're out on the road, you have to think that in a van, this is a small metal tent. This isn't a moving hotel room. It doesn't have hookups to city water unless there's a hookup to city water. It doesn't have a hookup to power unless you're plugged into a power outlet. So you are in a self-contained box. So power, water, heating and cooling, the things that everyone like, you go in and push a button or open a tap and there's water. It doesn't work like that in a van. To turn on the water system is a 10-step procedure to be able to turn that on and off. So and it's not complicated steps, but it's still 10 steps instead of, hey, I'm just going to turn on the tap and there's magical amounts of water that never run out.
That's how I was envisioning van life. So when I found, I was imagining what we wanted from van life, and I don't think we clarified this very well at the beginning. I was imagining a hotel room on wheels where I was just going to go to major cities, park on the street, and just use it like a hotel room, so I could go to New York for a month and not have to spend $600 a night to stay in Times Square. And then trying to figure out where can you actually park overnight, because as van life became more popular, cities started looking at it and saying how do we stop people from doing this? Because it's not necessarily the safest or most hygienic way. We have a condo on wheels, really. From a pricing perspective, this van costs as much as a condo. So it's not like we have to worry, we have running water, we have heat, we have all those things. But I think there are other people who have adopted van life who weren't necessarily affluent when they adopted van life, and they have to figure out just the basic necessities of life all the time. So learning about how other people are handling those challenges is really interesting, because we had challenges where our power just stopped working. So we didn't have heat, and it was minus, I don't know.
It was cold.
What's the Fahrenheit? But
it was cold.
We
negative
were in
numbers,
Iowa,
right?
and it was really cold.
Negative numbers like that belong in math class. That's not supposed to be the temperature outside.
And we had no heat, and we tried really hard to get it. We brought it to a place we were in Elizabethtown, I think, when the heat went. We're like, oh, are we going to go home? And I was like, no, we're not going home. I'm invested in this. So we just
Carrie has photos of me under the van with feet sticking out, right? Being Mr. Mechanic down there, and you learn more about things than you ever want to know.
I think I sat in the parking lot of a Mexican restaurant for 6 hours that day.
Yeah.
So that's something about van life, is it's not like what I find frustrating about it, but also one of the things that I'm learning, right? It's just patience, right? You have to get everything, you have to put everything away before you can move to another spot with van life, right? So it forces you into a spot of organization, which I am not. You can't really tell, but like that's not me.
It's not
I
me.
can happily, like, I will kick a path to my bed through my laundry and not even think twice about it, where Ian would prefer that our house had everything where it was supposed to be. So Ian likes van life because there is no clutter. There's no like knickknacks or anything. Like there's nothing to knock over. There's no, like, you have to put everything away. Everything has to be secured and then you can leave. So that's, for me, the most annoying part of van life, and for Ian, the most satisfying part.
It really does bring joy to my heart. So we've got like you asked about kit, and you kind of think about it from necessities all the way to technology. So we have a 20-gallon freshwater tank and a 10-gallon gray water tank. Gray water, for those who aren't familiar, is water that went down the sink, but not human waste.
Right.
We've got a composting toilet. We've got, we have a shower. We have 380 watts of solar on the roof that goes to 300 amp hours worth of batteries. And if you're not familiar with electricity, looking into van life builds is a really good way to get familiar with the concepts of how electricity works and amp hours and battery capacity and things like that. 300 amp hours isn't a lot, but when you think about DC power instead of AC power, alternating current versus direct current, if like everything in a car is DC power.
Okay.
And so when you have inverters and the ability to charge off of your van's alternator, the ability to have DC based appliances, 300 amp hours can go a really, really long way if you use it right. So the most power draining things we have in the van are our laptops.
Right.
The laptops are by far the most power hungry items. And we have a portable battery unit that is another 100 amp hour battery that we take that has solar panels and things like that can run both of the laptops for a day. We can plug that into the cigarette lighter and charge it. We can throw out solar panels outside and trickle charge it if we're at a campground or somewhere, out of the way where the panels won't get run over by another car.
That's a new challenge.
Yeah. So once you get the essentials out of the way, when it comes to technology, we went with Microsoft Surface Pros, the Surface Pro 7s. We did the Core i7 model because we did want a little bit of extra oomph when it comes to processing power. We loaded it up on RAM, stuff like that. And then we we did quite a bit of research, and there's kind of twofold things that we're thinking of. We went and bought a Verizon, and the carriers it doesn't matter, your carrier choice. We bought a Verizon Jetpack with 150 gigs per 30-day billing cycle of data. And that's a 4G unit, not a 5G unit, but that works pretty well as the primary source of internet. And we're looking into potentially getting the Starlink as a backup. The issue with Starlink, for anyone who's doing what we're doing, is your upload is very, very limited. You got, 75, 100 megs down, which is more than enough for anyone. But you're only going to get that 5 to 10 upload off of satellite on the best of days, and you'll be 1 to 5 megs upload on the worst of days if you've got cloud, weather, whatever, and what have you. So people looking into Starlink, you got to think about your upstream. If you're doing video chats, if you're doing streaming, if you're doing a bunch of phone calls, Starlink's not going to be there for you just yet. But it's a good secondary, good backup. And then
that is an interesting, thing that you raised, right? Is that this consideration for something that we all take for granted now, because the internet is pretty much a utility. And so it's just like you were talking about water earlier. Most people take it for granted, right? So I have like unlimited data, the upload and download speed on, just your regular internet services from, like you said, carrier of choice are all pretty good now, right? Like we can all do this, but when you have that remote contention, now you have data limits. Now you have different limits on, kind of the speed for upload and download. And yeah, just some really tricky considerations.
And so you learn some tricks of the trade, right? Like if you're thinking about, hey, we need to work for 8 hours today, The easy spot is go and find a Starbucks, go and find a hotel lobby, go and find somewhere that you can park and use that public wireless that's non-metered and use that for items. So if I'm uploading a podcast off the iPad or whatever, like the iPad can just be connected to that public wireless. It's set to the side. It's just sitting there doing its thing. We're pounding away on the laptops. We're taking phone calls or whatever. And then when we're done for the day, we'll pack up and leave that area. So you need to think about the stuff in the van as use when needed, not default setting. So you're not using your jetpack as your default internet. You're using it when you need to, or if you're out boondocking or whatever. You're not using your water in the van or the facilities in the van or staying in the van all the time. You live out of a van. You don't live in a van. And that's an important distinction to make. So you want to try to find spaces where you can get multi-utility out of. A laundromat, great option if they have wireless, because you can post there, you can work, you can get a chore done, you can probably even refill your water, right? Like you can tick 3 or 4 different things off of your list with one visit. And so some people might be like, ugh, laundry day. And it's like, oh, hey, laundry day, we'll be able to get a bunch of stuff done today. So it shifts the perspective is important.
I love it.
Wasted time is just driving time, right? If we're trying to go somewhere and we don't want to drive more than, like, sometimes we have 5-6 hours a day. That's a long day, but that's like burnt productivity most of the time. So you're either going to get like motion sick trying to write content while the car's going. We tried to do some podcast recording, but we haven't really nailed that. Like, I don't want to be the guy walking through the airport with the, sharing my knowledge with everybody as if like, I don't like that kind of crappy, as much content as possible approach to life.
Yeah, agreed.
Maybe take off your ball cap, maybe take off your sunglasses, maybe sit still so I don't have to watch your head do this while you're recording. And like that's something that I haven't, like, maybe it's just a matter of like volume content and we have to get used to that, or maybe it's all audio content when we're driving, but like finding something to do with that lost 6 hours for me would be my next role of like, what do we do while we're in the cab of the vehicle? Because I don't want to drive at night all the time and I don't want to burn all my work hours.
I wish I had your, technology many years ago. I'll share a little story. My wife and I, when our children were quite young, my son was 5 years old at the time and my daughter was 2. And he watched this show, which was a travel show, with kid hosts, right? And he said, oh, I want to be on that show. And I said, well, it's probably going to be pretty tough to get you on that show. But Leslie and I talked about it because their vacation time was coming up. And we said, why don't we do a cross Canada road trip? And of course, me in my mind, it's like, why don't we get sponsors? And why don't we actually do a new video every 2 days so people can follow us across the country? So we drove to Halifax to make sure that we started on that ocean. We got some water from that ocean. And then it was a 5-week adventure as we crossed the country to Vancouver to get water from the other ocean and, combine it. But we had to drop off DVDs, which we had to burn every day to Staples, who was one of our sponsors for moving stuff across. And our editor was in Toronto, would then update and edit the videos. And that's why there was kind of this 2-day cadence, right? And the internet thing was always the worst. We would actually drive through neighborhoods and look for open signals. And back then,
driving, amazing.
Oh yeah, back then they existed, right? So anyways, I just thought I'd share that because what we wouldn't have given, to have at least some kind of reliable, high-speed internet connection. But, back in those days, it just didn't exist, right? So
imagine what it'll be like 10 years from now.
Right?
So and it's interesting you mentioned that. Like, there has never been a greater opportunity for the youngest generation than now to be able to enable a travel bait, like a see the world, create experiences while not sacrificing career opportunities than there is today. If you're in the tech space, you can do infrastructure support remotely. You can do development remotely. You can do marketing and digital remotely. You can be doing sales remotely. Like, there is so many different career paths for a well-motivated individual that they can quite literally downsize their life, get into a vehicle, and go explore their country. They can go around Canada. They can go around the US. You can go around Europe. You can experience the world from your 20s to your 30s and even pursue like the opportunity of a FIRE lifestyle, right? Financially independent, retire early. Someone like a van is absolutely a method for that, because you're not paying rent, you're not paying fixed utility bills, you're not paying airline travel, you're not paying hotels. You've got all of this opportunity where you can be, you know, if a kid's making 60, 80, $100,000 a year, and they're spending only 30K a year on this van, even it with, you know, and $30,000 a year in a van is a pretty good lifestyle in the van, even with driving, right? It's 30 grand. You got $70,000 or whatever, 50 or 40 after tax that you're able to just invest. And the concept of between 20 and 30 getting $500,000 into the market, like you are financially set. If you leave that alone for 20 or 30 years, you wouldn't even have to save anymore, but they can. So
I love it.
The opportunity is there.
You know, I started working remotely about 20 years ago. And back then it was out of necessity for, you know, for my marriage. I had a job up in Ottawa, and we'd moved there from Vancouver. And so very different cities, Vancouver to Ottawa. And the winters in Ottawa, you talked about the van, you know, kind of freezing because the heat didn't work. I mean, winters there are absolutely horrendous. My wife hated it. So I went to my employer and said, look, we've got two options here. One, we got to figure out how I can do this from down in the Niagara region where my wife's family is, because I'm traveling so much for work. And if we can't do that, then, you know, we've just got to, you know, part ways as friends. And took him a couple of days, called me back and said, yeah, let's give it a whirl. Let's give it a 3-month go. Right. And, you know, here we are 20 some odd years later. So this remote work thing certainly isn't going away. And I love what you guys are doing to showcase that it's not just about the ability to be able to work remotely, but this idea of quality of life, right? That you get to see these places, that you get to do these things while still pursuing your career. I think that's magic. And I think that's a great opportunity for young people.
I mean, I think for us, we still have our, you know, we still have our ridiculous, like every time we come home now, like, why do we have a house this big? What are we doing with all this crap? Why did we buy, like, we can live in no space at all. Yet we felt like we needed this enormous house and this yard that we hate mowing. And so it kind of like starts to grate on you after a while. You're like, could we live in the van forever? Could we live in the van full time? Is that something that is, like, and then, you know, like you'll have a day on the road where you're like, F this. So
the van's the worst thing ever. Why did we buy this?
We have the best of both worlds right now, but I think one of the things that it has shown us is that we want to significantly downsize our lives, right? We want to get rid of most of the things that we own. We want a significantly smaller home that we don't have to heat in the winter. So I don't think we're going to go full-time van life, but we're definitely going to move to a significantly smaller home.
And then van life in the winter where it's warm or whatever, warmish, right? Van life creates some intentionality and some space, especially when you're doing it as a couple. So, I mean, both Carrie and I have built multiple businesses, and we've had the positives and the negatives from that experience. And this isn't either of our first marriage, and there's a reason for that, right? Entrepreneurship is difficult on relationships.
Yeah.
Being in a 2 entrepreneur household, there's a lot of grace that comes naturally from that, where it's a, hey, you know, I've got a 10 o'clock day today. Okay. Like that. Thanks for letting me, it's not a, oh man, you have to work until 10 o'clock. It's, hey, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to load up my day now so that we can both work until 10 o'clock, because why, like, I'm not going to sacrifice the time. But the van creates an interesting dynamic where it's easy to kind of unplug, and you're not going to be Netflixing and chilling because it's drawing power, it's wasting internet, etc. It's like, hey, let's unplug and look, there's this lake over there. Let's go walk around there and kind of explore, or let's go park in this town and explore this little town. Like, it creates this intentionality on space with your time that when you're done working, you're then diving into life with each other. And that's one of my favorite things so far, is just some of the experiences. And it's not like climbing a mountain, but sometimes you do that. Sometimes it's just walking through a little town in nowhere, Indiana, in Madison, Indiana, and looking
Uranus.
Yes, finding Uranus on the road. Right? Like the fudge store,
Oh, on
whatever.
Route 66, they have a store called, is it Uranus? Yeah, visit your
Oh,
Yeah. Visit Uranus.
and it's like
on
this
Route
candy
66.
store. When you walk in, everyone yells, "Welcome to Uranus!" And then like they scream like different like sexual innuendos the whole
Jokes,
time that
yeah.
you're there.
Yeah.
And
That's-
they're like high school kids, you know. So there's like this like, how appropriate is this?
Yeah,
But-
it's like this 18-year-old is yelling this stuff at us, and here we are, you know, at 40 in our 40s, and we're laughing like school kids too, right? Like, haha, this is fun. But it's things like that, right? Like it's the laughter, it's the experience, it's the memories that are crafted through things that you wouldn't expect. That's by far my favorite piece so far, is it's just creating this intentionality around our time that gives us space to just be and
I love
experience.
it. This whole concept that, you know, experiences have a lot more value than things, right? That,
Mhm.
you know, the reasons that we do things, I think of my own career as well. This idea that there has to be a certain level of happiness in the work, that there has to be a certain level of reward. And I'm far less driven by the dollars than I am the experience. And somebody once said to me, I loved it. They said, look, love what you do, and I promise you the money will take care of itself, right? Because if you don't love it, you probably won't do as good a job. You probably won't get, you know, nearly the reward back, right? So yeah, love that idea of experiences. Hey, in respect for your time and for our audience, we're getting to that point in the you know, the interview where I just have to ask you, if you had one piece of advice, there are going to be those that are looking for inspiration on this. If you only had one piece of advice for them to start with this, you know, remote work experience at an extreme level, what would that be?
rent first.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure that we needed a 6-figure van to explore this lifestyle. We could have probably rented one for a month and figured out the ins and outs of it first. That's not really our style. We like to go like,
We do dive in with both feet.
yeah.
So since Carrie stole rent first, because that was going to be mine, I would say, you know, and this is weird, and I feel conflicted giving this advice, but I would, like, if you're thinking about doing van life, especially the Van Dwellers Reddit, not the Van Life Reddit, the Van Dwellers Reddit, it's got 1.7 million people in it right now, is an incredible source of information. There's a lot of frequently asked questions, there's some wikis, there's a lot of consolidated knowledge from across the spectrum. So if you got a 10 grand budget, there's an opportunity for van life for you. And if you have a 100 grand budget, there's an opportunity for van life for you. And the consolidated wisdom of people who have been doing it for 5, 10, 20 years,
Wow.
living in a vehicle, is collected there in that Reddit. So like, I would go there, I would do an intense amount of research. And when you think you're comfortable enough, that means you probably need to spend a couple more months of research till you get back to the area where you're saying, I really don't know what to expect, but I think I can handle what comes up. That's, you know, and dive in. But yeah, go rent a couple for a while. There's the market's inflated right now, so don't be in a rush to buy.
Right. Well, I love that advice on both counts, and, you know, can't thank you guys enough for doing this interview. It's fascinating to me, and I really look forward to hopefully running into you on the road sometime in the van.
100%. We'll be around American Southwest in winter, probably, or Maui again, one or the other.
Wow. Well, if you're in the Southwest, then I will try and see you there. And listen,
There we go.
everybody, thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Tiger Tube and Tigerpaw Radio. And until next time, keep learning.